Caroline Flack, 40 years old. And in many ways, not that long ago, she had the world at her feet. I know nothing. I know no more than you do about any of this. So I can't sit here and tell you it was because of that or it was because of this. I do have some rather negative opinions, views, beliefs about the British tabloid media, but given that I wang on about those almost every day, I don't think today needs any special mention. The public narrative is one of social media at least as much as tabloid media. My view on the tabloid media is not new. I used to be a show business editor on a national newspaper, albeit that I did so at a time and with an editor that allowed me not to indulge in the sort of excesses and abuses that are commonplace in the profession. I'm going to be completely honest with you. That was luck, right? Had I been in the chain of command on a different newspaper under a different editor with the same personality and the same ambitions, I don't think I would ever have said, no, I'm not doing that. On principle, not as a younger man, because I mean, that is all right, we'll find someone that will. And I'd have been back measuring inside legs by tea time, which is, a little bit embarrassing, but I think it's very important to be honest. This sort of holier than thou position that some media critics adopt is probably bogus. I'm lucky that I didn't have to do the stuff that I would now feel soiled by, but I don't think I would have had the financial security or the moral confidence to say no. So the stories, and again, I just briefly going in on the tabloid tactics before we move on to other areas of Caroline Flack's tragic death. The stories that used to make me snigger, but always with a slight sense of discomfort, profound discomfort, and you would get people almost boasting about doing a so-called death knock and trying to steal a photograph of the murdered child from the mantelpiece of the mourning family. Now, some of this might have been exaggeration, some of it might have been embellished, but there will be a kernel of truth, and that was a kernel of truth that was present 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. You could probably trace it back to when Rupert Murdoch bought The Sun and put a man called Larry Lamb in charge. That is really when things began to change, and Rupert Murdoch realised how much money could be made from commoditising, to be kind, fetishising, to be a little less charitable, death and tragedy. And given that the story which actually turned Murdoch's head involved the murdered wife of his best friend, it's a particularly interesting period of British media history. But again, it's not necessarily what we should concern ourselves with today. What interests me is whether you, as a consumer of media, both traditional and social, think that anything profound has actually changed. And I actually just want to know what you think. That will be question number one. If you are, and also, this is such a weird conversation to be having with regard to Instagram. Instagram's quite nice, right? Do you get bullied on Instagram? Is there nastiness on Instagram? You do get nastiness on Instagram, forgive me. My field of experience is confined exclusively to Twitter. On Facebook, I'm only in touch with people I already know. Twitter is very much part of what some people would laughably describe as a brand. It's part of my job. It's part of the platform that I use to get out there. And you take the rough with the smooth on that. And you can, of course, walk away. I only discovered this morning that my friend Amanda Abbington, the actress, is no longer on Twitter. I'd been wondering where she'd been. But given that her former husband or former partner is in the news talking, I think, quite responsibly, if that's not an inappropriate word to use in this context, talking quite responsibly about the fact that he's hit his children. I thought I'd better see what Amanda's got to say about this, and then sort of discovered or remembered that she's walked away, having previously been on it a lot. So you can always do that. There's no point pretending otherwise. But it is a little bit, to me at least, it's a little bit different from all that's gone before, because it gives a sort of loud hailer to people who I think most of us would be baffled, stroke, really troubled and concerned by, if you are dedicating more than, 2 minutes of your day to trying to hurt people that you have never met because they happen to be, quotes, famous, end quotes, or quotes in the public eye, end quotes. There's nothing new about that impulse. There's nothing new about that. It's probably close to an illness, isn't it? I mean, depending on how much time you're dedicating to it. But there's something about social media that has magnified phenomena that have long existed in a way that does, to me, as a former Fleet Street show business journalist, and obviously now as a professional gob on a stick with 500,000 followers on social media, it does feel a little bit different. But my goodness me, I mean, to leap from that to the rather dangerous and irresponsible and directly contrary to the advice that the Samaritans give us when dealing with stories like this, to claim that one single issue could have provoked an act like this is not only highly unlikely, but also highly irresponsible. So, the issue that intrigues me the most, perhaps, is anonymity. I mean, it shouldn't really bother anybody if they're getting gypped from someone who hasn't got the confidence to put their own name on their own communications. I mean, it shouldn't. But I can prove to you that it does. If you received a death threat through the post this morning, you wouldn't really care whether it was signed or not, would you? So there is always an extreme I can reach for to illustrate the point that I'm trying to make. If you received a note through your letterbox saying, "Ooh, I really hate you, you ugly mean man," it would probably hurt more if it was signed Doris at number 37 than it would if it was signed Doris 034678666662, or, I don't know, England's Rose, or Up the Christian West, or something like that. I mean, there is something quite comical about anonymity, up to the point where people actually get worried. And you might be worried about an extant threat, or I think in this case, the focus has been drawn to the question of mental fragility, vulnerability. And I heard a clip from Mark Wright, who I think is famous for being on The Only Way is Essex, earlier in the morning. It was playing out on our own bulletins. That was actually moved me a bit. I mean, I think having a Fleet Street background means when you get nonsense on social media, you're almost proud of it. The idea that people think you're this important is almost flattering. But if you come from a different background, if you come from a non-journalistic background, it must be really weird. And to hear him say it does actually hurt made me a little bit embarrassed, actually, because, the giggles and laughs that you can have at people probably overlook the fact that other people might really get hurt by this stuff. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me is probably one of the biggest lies humanity has ever told itself. And yet we all sang that, didn't we, in the 1970s and the 1980s.